Every single wild animal has within them an indomitable spirit, a ferocious, raging fury that will rise up and resist domination. The tiniest little animal, if its back is against the wall, is going to turn and face a bear, show its teeth and raise its claws, and knowingly to its death it will fight, which is what I call the primordial spirit of rebellion. That fire of fury that's within every animal to resist domination. For any wild animal to be domesticated, that spirit must be broken. And then it must be bred out of them. That can take thousands of years. But that is the process of domestication. That is what has happened for every domesticated species. And every domesticated species was domesticated for one purpose, and that was to serve humans. To be beasts of burden, or to be food, or both. So when you look at the human domestication, you have to answer that question. How did they become domesticated, and why? Well, it's obvious when you look at history. Humans were domesticated for forced human labor. Just like every other domesticated animal, humans were domesticated to be a beast of burden. Hello, thank you for coming. My name is Adam Lane, and this is the search for terrestrial intelligence. Around 2020, I began to seriously research the psychology of human obedience. What I was observing was this potential for extreme complicity, obedience, and subservience to authority. Somewhere around 80% of the population completely, without question, just because somebody was wearing a lab coat and had a clipboard, would comply absolutely to the authority of the medical establishment. Back when I was in high school, I had a bumper sticker on my car. It said, "Question authority." And it wasn't all that radical of an idea back then. But it seems more and more that is simply non-existent in society. This led me to do a lot of research into human domestication, which I discovered, to my surprise, that evolutionary biologists and anthropologists had the opinion that the human was the only self-domesticated animal on Earth. So I questioned the statement immediately. What do they mean by self-domesticated? And so I thought possibly they mean something like in the nature of self-harm or self-injury. But then, looking at the rhetoric, they were using statements like natural group selection for docility, that it was some form of mutual benefit of cooperation. That the species would become selective of those that were more docile, more passive. To me, the statement of self-domestication contradicts itself in that How do you have a domesticated species without a domesticator? In the same sense that you can't have a ruler without those that they rule. All animals on Earth are domesticated by humans. The human is the domesticator in every case. And to me, it was blatantly obvious that this was the same thing for the human domestication. To me, it was blatantly obvious. Just take a look at history, and it's clear to see that the human is the domesticator as well as the domesticated. If this was what they meant by self-domestication, then I would agree. But according to the rhetoric, this is not what they were saying, and in no cases did I find them discussing the domesticator in any situation in reference to human domestication. Domestication is, by definition, a epigenetic transformation of a species. That is the result of thousands and thousands of years of violence, brutality, and the utilization of fear. You see, there's a difference between domesticated and tamed. And every instant of domestication was done using captivity, fear, brutality. So I saw that it was no different in the human species. The human species became a domesticated species because it was a tiny, tiny subset of the human species that became the dominator, that became the domesticator. Seeing that the human is an epigenetically transformed species, my first thought was, well, we should not really be calling ourselves Homo sapiens anymore. The biologists and anthropologists agreed because they had already changed the name of the human species to Homo sapien sapien. Once you know the definition of the word sapien, and you know that in Latin sapien means wise, they see that we have changed significantly enough from the original Homo sapien to require a new descriptive term for our species. But they decided to double down on the sapien and call it the human Homo wise. We're Homo sapiens sapien, which is so absurd in its redundancy. And I can never say it with a straight face. Well, no animal transforms in that direction under the influence of domestication. After domestication, every species domesticated is less capable, less intelligent, becomes complicit and docile, and incapable of using violence to defend themselves or to protect themselves from being captive or dominated. They become, without question, obedient to the authority of the domesticator. And so this is where we are. This is where humanity is. At least 80% of the population, probably more, is incapable of resisting the authority of the dominator. So my next thought was, what should we call the human species? And right away I thought, Homo domesticus. I thought I made that up, but after looking it up, there's already even a book written by a Yale professor, which I thought was kind of surprising. A Yale professor, and I haven't read it because I've only found it in French, and my French is definitely not good enough to read such a book. It looks very interesting, and I hope to find an English version of it. There's also Professor Scott's papers looked very interesting because perhaps we're in agreement in some ways, or thinking along the same lines, just from reading the titles of his papers and books. I'm very curious now. To me, this was a logical progression in my thought process. We are a domesticated species, clearly. This is an epigenetic transformation of the species. So a new descriptive terminology is required. The domesticator of the domesticated, I call Homo dominus. Maybe I coined that term, I don't know. And if you look with intellectual honesty at human history, the presence of the domesticator is blatantly obvious. This is very clear to see. This is easy to observe. I have not seen it discussed by the academic establishment. I'm seriously dubious of their reasoning. It's well known when you see that academia defends the power elite. I'm sure there's some, like Professor Scott, I'm sure there's some, but, and I have not read that much, but from what I've seen, I don't find an authentic discussion. I don't see it being addressed. I see it being ignored. I see that they're pointing in the other direction is extremely deceptive. It seems like they're trying to cover up or they're trying to protect a certain class of people who could be feel a bit threatened by being put under the microscope in such a way, by having the light shine on them as a maladapted subset of the human species. You see, in the study of biological species, you have a thing that biologists call intraspecific competition. And there's interspecific competition, and this is when two different species are in competition with each other. You have the wolves fighting the bears or something like this, right? Over territory or over hunting areas. So when you see intraspecific competition, this is like one band of chimpanzees fighting with another band of chimpanzees over some resource territory, or something like this. Bears fighting bears and monkeys fighting monkeys, right? Well, in this forensic analysis of human history, what I'm looking at is a very blatant and clear domination. This is not competition. This is a very blatant and clear domination. So I am going to use the term intraspecific domination. So we have the split of the species, two subsets of the Homo genus, Homo domesticus, Homo dominus, which was a result of literally thousands and thousands of years of intraspecific domination, resulting in the epigenetic transformation of the species. That primordial spirit of rebellion that is in every wild animal, it is there as a form of natural protection against the threat of domination, just like an immune system is a natural form of defense. And now, as a domesticated species, this is almost non-existent in human consciousness. This is something that we really need to revitalize and to rediscover, and to bring back into the forefront of human consciousness an understanding of self-defense, of psychological and intellectual self-defense. If we ever imagine that it is possible to once again resemble Homo sapien, if we ever wish to be free of tyranny, instead of the demise of the human species living forever as Homo domesticus, domestication removes the animal from its natural environment and puts it in a state of anxiety and fear immediately, because it loses its understanding that it can care for itself and that nature would have been a sanctuary instead of something to fear. Nature becomes this scary place when you suddenly don't have any consciousness of how you survive, and you can't depend upon yourself, and you live in a state of fear. That fear is capitalized on by the dominator. And every generation, the animal moves further and further from their original genetic expression. This is how a species becomes epigenetically transformed. They move further and further away. This takes thousands and thousands of years until the species has epigenetically transformed into a new species. I would love to see humanity resemble once again the original genetic expression of Homo sapien. Civilization was the product of broken values. Civilization occurred, or at least the type of civilization that we exist in now, occurred as a result of these broken values. I always take it way back because I think it was small decisions that had lasting impacts. What could have been perceived as a small or simple decision in the past unfolds in larger and larger and larger impact, exponentially affecting the entire evolution of the species. The hunter and gatherer existed lightly upon the earth. Their environmental impact, if you will, was very, very small. There was a requirement from that mobility that they could only acquire so much, they could only carry and travel with so much. Maybe they had a stash here or there, right? But they could only accumulate so much. Beyond that, they were limited to how much they could store and to keep. Then, as humans began to settle into small settlements and build structures, suddenly they had storage capacity for goods and resources that could last through the seasons and last for, much longer period of time. This gave humans, for the first time, the ability to accumulate resources, to accumulate wealth. Once this began, this need to accumulate grew and grew. And then the settlements became larger, the structures became bigger, the ability to store resources grew. And so the ability to accumulate and to produce what became known as wealth. Those that had more became wealthier than those that had less. Nevertheless, their capability, their intelligence, their strength, their benefit as a person, this didn't have the value anymore. In small nomadic tribal situations, an individual's value is based on their capability, their intelligence, their strength, their morality, their compassion. Their benefit to the tribe comes from the quality of the individual. Once everything shifted so that society began to value the accumulation of stuff, the accumulation of wealth, once that became the value, a person's value was based on how much they had, not the quality of their being. This gave an extraordinary advantage to the tyrannical human who was willing to simply take others' accumulation. Those with that propensity for brutality, violence, that sadistic, vicious personality of the tyrannical human, their advantage grew. And as civilization grew, their power grew, becoming now, thousands of years later, the tyrannical human has an extraordinary advantage over those that guide their life by morality, by compassion, by sympathy, empathy, through the desire to be a good person. There's not a whole lot of value in our modern civilization to being a good person by any means necessary. Those with the wealth have the power. Because of the broken values instilled in the formation, in the foundation of the civilization itself. This civilization grew from this imbalance. This civilization grew in support of and structured and designed by the tyrannical human. Homo dominus built this civilization in their image, using the forced labor of Homo domesticus. Forced human labor was the original industrial fuel source for the formation and the foundation of the civilization we live in. Everything designed, built, organized, and structured to benefit Homo dominus, the tyrannical human. The welfare of the masses has never been a priority or an interest to the ruling class. The welfare of the masses is something that is just there to manage human misery. Just there to keep the population complicit, to keep them obedient, just enough. It's there just enough to keep the population complicit, obedient, and agreeable to the decisions that are being made for them by the ruling class, by the power elite, by Homo dominus. And so just like in this last election, the illusion of choice was presented to the population to help keep them quiet, to help pacify their frustration. Once again, just mendastic propaganda to fool the population into believing that they have a say in what's going on around them, that they are actually participating. All the population is actually participating in is their own captivity. So, yeah, that kind of... This is a really depressing topic for a lot of people. But like I said, I'm trying to illustrate the road away from this, the road out of this situation. A road that follows a path of life. It must seem fairly absurd to compare modern human beings, to look at where we are at our stage of progress, then compare that to the Paleolithic man and an observably primitive human, and then claim that the Paleolithic man was more intelligent, more capable, stronger, healthier, and superior in every way to the present-day human. I hear how absurd that must sound. Developing my hypothesis, I have challenged myself throughout this process, and I question it all the time, as you should, and don't take my word for it. I certainly could very well be wrong, but the aspect of this analysis that I find really, really encouraging is if you consider the fact that this was conditioned into that this state of humanity was conditioned into existence. This was cultivated. Human domestication was cultivated, just as all the other domesticated animals were cultivated on purpose, intentionally. And just as other domesticated animals, the process can be reversed. That's why I pointed it out in one of my first podcasts, the pigs that go wild and become feral pigs, you can see that their bodies transform to begin to resemble their original genetic expression. We may also be able to revert to find that humanity can begin to resemble our original genetic expression. At least we can get closer to it. Even the domestic pigs do not become, they do not revert completely 100% to become wild boar again. But it gets very close, and it's very, very similar. And they what's really encouraging is they regain their senses, they regain their abilities, they regain their intelligence and capability. They remember what it was to be wild again. And so I'm not talking about humans going back into living as hunter and gatherers, for instance. But I am talking about a recentering of our paradigm. I'm talking about a restructuring of our paradigm and a realignment of what we consider important so that we can refocus our attention on making these connections that will bring coherency back into the human species. To me, it's not about being wild. It's not about being animalistic or about being wild. It's about being connected to a coherency. People, they look at where we're at right now and they see development and they see technology and they think, wow, we really have come very far. But we haven't. Because all of the progress has been suppressed, inhibited, and held back. So if you want to really think about it, if you want to contemplate human development, we have to think of where would we have been right now? Where would humanity have been right now if our progress had not been inhibited? If intelligence had not been suppressed? If education had not been used to dumb down the public? Where might we have been? So these decisions clearly are not being made for the betterment of humanity. They are being made for the betterment of a very select few. That select few I am calling Homo dominus. The vast majority of us, Homo domesticus, are the beasts of burden. Now, look where we're going. Now, we're going back into a feudal society, now with the coming age of this technocratic neo-feudalism. This is not progression. This is regression. We are not moving forward. We are stagnating. And we are collapsing as a species. So I'm bleak and jaded and have a very negative perspective of where humanity is at the moment. But I am encouraged by the fact that if this is a condition that was cultivated, then we can cultivate the opposite. I talk a lot about rebellion, but I am not talking about revolution. I am not talking about conflict with Homo dominus. I don't want a conflict with Homo dominus. I just want Homo domesticus to step up and walk away from them. This subset of humanity, it thrives off of violence. It thrives off of sadistic brutality. There's nothing good that will come from any kind of violent conflict with Homo dominus. I'm talking about getting up and walking away. That we understand that we are the power of the power elite. And that if we remove ourselves from that equation, the power elite has no more power. They are a parasitic species. They thrive off of the subjugation of humanity. If humanity just steps up and walks away, What do they have? What do they have? In the development of every country, every political system was developed in slavery or feudalism or some variety of subjugation, where the population is an industrial resource, and the fuel for building that civilization is forced human labor. This is the story throughout history for every country. It doesn't matter if you're talking about democracy or socialism or communism. These are all just variations of the theme. Variations on the theme of human domination. The management of the human livestock. So different philosophies for different practices. The fascist philosophy of the iron boot. The communist philosophy of this illusion of equality. Or the illusion of a democracy or a republic. The fantasy of by the people, for the people. Every single political philosophy is simply a tactic and a philosophy for managing human misery. Every single one. That's their entire purpose. How do I know that? Every single government on this planet is involuntary. Not one voluntary government. These governments claim ownership of the people that they govern. The people are their livestock. They are owned and managed as such. If you do not live in a voluntary government, you are not free. If you were not given the choice to participate in that government, you are not free. It is not freedom to have this choice here or that choice there, to choose from the blue side or to choose from the red side. That is not a choice. That is the illusion of choice. And if we ever want to rise up out of this state, to be able to return our species to resemble Homo sapien, we must reawaken deep within the primordial spirit of rebellion. We must refuse domination. We must claim our freedom. We must develop self-reliance. We must revitalize our senses, our capabilities, ending our dependence on anything other than ourselves. We do this by refusing to eat domesticated food. Refuse the grains. Refuse the processed, chemicalized garbage that is being promoted as food for humans. This is not human food. That is maybe the food of the domesticated human, but that is not human food. And if we ever imagine that we could possibly be wild and free again, we must absolutely refuse to obey. We cannot enjoy our subservience. Embrace hardship. Embrace the wilderness. Embrace the natural order. Because that is the only way we will ever reawaken the Homo sapien within. So thank you for being here. My name is Adam Lane, and this is The Search for Terrestrial Intelligence.